Hi, this is Frid from The Joy of Syntax and English in Color. A few days ago, I made a video where I introduced you to clause elements and to my color scheme in order for you to be better able to appreciate my freebies. And today I want to discuss different terminology around clause elements. And before I do this, I want to remind you that a terminology in a system of terminologies or terms or concepts are not right or wrong. They always come from a school of thought or philosophy of life or a grammar model or some kind of other model. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, where does the terminology come from? What is it supposed to help with? And do I want it or need it? Or if I have to use it because I'm in a classroom, how can I use it? And how can I not get overwhelmed? And so what I'm going to unfold to you today is not the truth, but different ways of tackling something that I think we should tackle, sentences. And all of this is supposed to lead you to an understanding of English language and English syntax so that you can appreciate great art when you encounter it, and so that you can work on your writing skills and on your close reading skills. So, of course, I have prepared a PowerPoint, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And we'll start. There we go. So different terminology around clause elements and predicate appositives. Okay, remember we talked about clause elements. Now, what are clause elements? They are units or elements or groupings of words or individual words in the sentence that are viewed from the perspective of what function do they perform in the sentence or clause in order to create meaning. Remember that words on their own do not have meaning and do not convey meaning, but they only convey meaning potentials. And they need to be put into context, usually with other words, but at least with the situation, and situation in a broad sense, so that they can mean something. And syntax enables this creation of relationship among words. And so words can sometimes band together in groups that are often called phrases, and sometimes they build clauses. And then we can look at, okay, how do these words and phrases function to create meaning in this particular clause or sentence? Okay, these are the clause elements that I discussed last time. So subjects, excuse me, subjects, verbs, objects, adverbials, predicate, complements, and objective predicates. Those are, for the most part, traditional terms. The term of adverbial is a little bit more modern, and I'm going to do an extra video presentation about that. And the predicate appositive is in the blue box because, strictly speaking, it is not a clause element, or predicate appositives are not clause elements, but they are non-finite or verbless predicates that have been placed alongside the existing predicate and then look like clause elements or can be treated as clause elements. But they tend to be movable. Not all of them are movable. And again, that's a topic for another video. Okay. Now I already gave you the caveat about terminologies. And another side note, terminologies and nomenclatures are similar, not quite the same. So there's terms, terminologies, nomenclatures. And then some people distinguish between categorization and classification, and the verbs to categorize and to classify. And for some people, these two are synonymous. So be careful when you discuss these with people. Make sure that you're on the same wavelength, and consult a dictionary, see whether you can agree on the dictionary definition, and if not, what definition you want to agree on, or just be aware that you have different definitions. That's also totally okay. Okay, so I already gave you this this caveat that terminologies, terms, concepts, classifications, and categorizations are not right or wrong, but are useful to you or not for a given purpose or in a given situation. Here's another side note that I will also talk about a lot in future videos. The link verb to be and the simple present tense for all verbs is often used, or they are often used to make sweeping truth statements. And statements that are often true, like the sun always rises in the morning, or usually rises in the morning. And or my dog likes to sleep on my bed. Like right now, he is on my bed. Can you see him? There he is. But then a lot of definitions, or usually definitions are, or well, I think always, but it's always dangerous to say always, definitions are formulated in the present tense and often with a link verb when we identify something or express attributes about something. And so the present tense, and especially the link verb in the present tense, often seduces us into believing what has been said in that form or shape as true. And of course, it doesn't have to be true. Like when I say, oh, this dog is beautiful, and that's my opinion, but I presented it as a truth. Of course, it's true to me, but it's always good to take yourself not too seriously. Okay, what I have not discussed yet with you and want to discuss briefly is the difference between predicates and verbs. Okay, what are subjects and predicates? Well, the subject, so many people define it differently, and you have to think about, do you want to look at it from a semantic point of view or a structural point of view, and what school of thought and grammar school do you come from, etc., etc. But often the subject is the focal point of a sentence or clause. And the predicate is whatever has been said about the subject. Now, in German especially, or in Germany especially, but also in some English-speaking areas, people use the words finite verb form and predicate synonymously. But strictly speaking, the predicate is whatever has been said about the subject. And here are examples, or actually just one example. We saw some elephants today. So we is the subject, saw some elephants today. And I used a lighter shade of pink and a lighter shade of blue because the subject is this bright pink when I do clause element analysis. And here I'm not doing a clause element analysis. I'm explaining to you the difference between a subject and its predicate. And now, whatever has been said about the subject is saw some elephants today. That is the predicate. And it is headed by a finite verb form. Now, an unreduced clause always has a finite predicate, meaning it has a finite verb form and most likely something else. Now, careful, when I have a simple sentence like, he slept, then slept is both the finite verb form and the predicate. Intransitive verbs can alone provide the predicate, and often do, but more frequently there's some other stuff in the predicate. Okay, now many people say predicate, but Longman says long verb phrase. So a normal verb phrase is the finite verb form, or the phrase that is fulfilling the function of the finite verb form in the clause. And the long verb phrase is what Longman means when they discuss the predicate. Now you will also hear theme rime. There are several schools of thought or philosophy or of linguistics who use the theme rime dichotomy. Careful here. In this particular sentence, we saw some elephants today. The theme is identical with the subject and the rime is identical with the predicate, but the theme rime categorization is not the same as the subject-predicate categorization, and they don't always overlap. They happen to overlap in this sentence, and I don't want to get into theme-reme analysis. It's not helpful in my kind of approach to teaching people critical thinking and good writing and close reading and an understanding of grammar for the purposes of teaching and for the purposes of self-development and awareness and all of that. But you need to be aware that that's out there, and you need to be aware that different people use it differently, and that in this particular sentence, the theme coincides with the subject and the reme coincides with the predicate. Okay, now we come to the essence of this video presentation. I want to show you different terminologies for the same elements. And I'm moving this out of the way. This is this little window where you can see me. And the problem is that sometimes I've moved it out of the way here on my screen, but then the video doesn't pick it up or doesn't pick it up fast enough. So I hope you can see everything here. We returned home is one of the example sentences that I gave you in the transitive pattern column last time, and you will see something like that, or I returned home, or we returned home, on my freebie. I'm going to put the link in the description box below so you can download the freebie if you haven't already done so. Now, in Curme's grammar, Curme is a very fantastic grammarian. Well, unfortunately, he has passed away. He would have been very, very old now. But he wrote a fantastic grammar of English and also a very good grammar of German, by the way. And he knew Old English and Middle English and early modern English and, of course, modern English. And he had read widely in American and British literature. And so he can quote very wonderful text excerpts and sentences, and he knows where constructions developed out of, or out of what constructions in Old English, modern English constructions developed. And that is very helpful to nerds like me, and I hope to you as well. Curme is great. You need a little bit of patience when you read him. And of course, he's not everybody's cup of tea because he is a traditionalist. So enough said about that, but he points out that home is actually an old noun. And for those of you who know German, we would say, ich ging nach Hause. Nach Hause is actually a prepositional phrase consisting of nach, the preposition nach, and a noun. And home in this case was just a noun in the accusative, and it had adverbial meaning. And so he would have called this an adverbial accusative of goal. Now, Quirk calls it an adverbial, an obligatory verb-related adverbial, because the verb to return always needs a place to return to. So that's why it's obligatory. It's syntactically or verb-related, syntactically obligatory or verb-related. So that's why I underlined it in blue. And I have adopted that way of saying it. So I'll make a special video about adverbials and adverbial clauses, but right now, this is the element that answers the question, where? Where did he return to? Okay, now Longman also calls it an adverbial, and they say it's a circumstance adverbial, and they also say that it's obligatory. Of course, they have to. Now, Huddleston and Pullum say, they call the verb, a notice here, so verb is the finite verb form for Curme. It can also be a word class, but here it's the finite verb form. Verb is also the finite verb form, the phrase or the verb that is finite and is the head of the predicate. Longman calls it the verb phrase, as previously mentioned, and Huddleston Pullum call these things predicators. So subject is the same for all of them, predicator, and then complement. Now, complements with Huddleston are all the elements that are obligatory from a syntactic point of view. So, and he specifies it, or the two people, they specify that in this case, the complement is a goal. So where do you want to go? It's our goal to go there. And careful, I'll mention it again. Halliday uses goal in a different sense. It'll be on one of the next slides. Now, I don't want to say much about Halliday. He developed a very, very complicated theory of language and a model of grammar. And the problem is that he produced so much literature about that and collaborated with a variety of people, his wife and Madison and all kinds of other people. And there are different schools of systemic functional grammar, and a lot of people just read a little bit and don't understand it very well, but then use the terms. So if you want to get into it, I can only tell you, go into it totally and be prepared to do a lot of reading. I personally don't need his approach. I am very much in favor, and always have been before I ever knew about him, of looking at language in context. It is so obvious to every practical person on earth that whatever has to be, whatever is evaluated needs to be seen in context. Only connect is one of my favorite mottos. But if you connect too much at one point in time, you will get lost and overwhelmed. And anyway, so I just will give you, remind you that Halliday sometimes, or his school sometimes, suggests analyzing sentences from 3 different perspectives: an experiential, an interpersonal, and a textual perspective, which he calls metafunction, or metafunctions. And there are 2 that are interesting for us. Well, actually here we have this is the interpersonal metafunction, and the analysis in accordance with that looks identical to Huddleston and Pullum's, except that complement and goal, they would never say that because that's something else. And now the experiential metafunction uses completely different terminology. And so in that one, verbs are not called verbs or predicators. Predicator makes sense too, because it has something to do with the predicate, and to predicate, it comes from the Latin word predicare and means to say about, to state about, or as we would say in Aachen, dran sagen. Now he calls verbs material on that level. He calls them processes, and he identifies 6 or 7 depending on who you ask. And so I'm not going to get into this. If you wanted this, there's good help out there in books. Lise Fontaine wrote a very, very helpful introduction to that, and there are great websites out there. But anyway, I just want to mention this because those terms float around, and I just want you to see where they are in comparison to clause elements. So subject, predicate, or complement on the interpersonal metafunctional level, and actor, material, process, and attribute for this particular one. Okay, theme rime is also something that he would discuss. And now theme is we, and returned home is the rime in this particular sentence. Okay, this is the basic transitive pattern. I love you, very important. Now Curme says subject, verb, object. Quirk says subject, verb, object. And by the way, I always colored the nomenclature that I use. And so you already can become familiar with the color scheme that way. Subject, verb, phrase, object is Longman's terminology, and you see it's very, very similar. Subject, predicator, object for Huddleston and Pullum, very similar. Subject, predicator, complement. Complement for Halliday on the interpersonal metafunction is everything, as I said, that is required by the verb. So objects and obligatory adverbials are required, so they're complements. Then we have sensor, mental process, and phenomenon. Again, I'm not going to get into that. There are people who have studied it and can explain that to you if you need it. We saw some elephants today. It is, again, a transitive pattern, and this time I added an adverbial that is not syntactically obligatory. Of course, whenever I use an adverbial, I find it semantically obligatory, otherwise I wouldn't use it. But if I say we saw elephants, or we saw some elephants, that is a syntactically complete clause. Now, Curme would say subject, verb, object, and adverb. Now, This, if you look it up in the dictionary, this word today is considered an adverb. And the category word, class, or parts of speech used to be a functional category, but now is often considered a formal category. If you don't know what I mean, ask me or request a separate video. Now, so Curme would say subject, verb, object, adverb. Quirk says subject, verb, object, adverbial, and I'm going with Quirk here because it is so broadly accepted nowadays. So the adverb is the word class, and it functions as an adverbial of time. Subject, verb, phrase, object, adverbial of circumstance. It's an optional adverbial of circumstance. And this, the row C, is Longman again. Subject, predicator, object, and adjunct. This is Huddleston Pullum. So you see, all those four grammars agree that some elephants is the object. And adjunct is the term that's used by Huddleston and Pullum and some other people for adverbials that are optional. And you see subject, predicator, complement, adjunct. Now, Halliday also uses adjunct for an adverbial on this interpersonal level for an adverbial that is optional. And complement is the object here because this is not an optional element, so it's a complement. And this particular clause, he would parse as sensor, mental process, phenomenon, and location, in parentheses, time, on the experiential level. I made you some cookies. Here we have two objects. And you see Curme, Quirk, and Longman agree. We have two objects. Quirk and Longman, and also, Quirk and Longman will say you is the indirect object and some cookies is the direct object. Curme will probably say that some cookies is the accusative object and you is the dative object from the Old English. And in German that would be the same. Ich habe wem wen oder was gegeben. So we have, we would call this in German, if we translate the sentence into German, this would be the dative object and this the accusative object. I wouldn't go there. I'm always happy when my students recognize that we have two objects. And why are they objects? They are the receiver of the verb, of the action of the verb, and either one could be the subject of a passive voice sentence. Some cookies were made and you were given cookies. So we have the object test. Now, Huddleston Pullum also says object, but only if the indirect object is positioned in between the verb and the direct object. If you were to add this indirect object as with the preposition, and you know you can do this, I made some cookies for you, then Huddleston and Pullum call that a prepositional complement. And so complement as something that's obligatory and prepositional because it's headed by a preposition. And Longman and Quirk would say it's a prepositional object. So, and that is a little bit of a problem because in traditional grammar, prepositional objects are the complements that follow a preposition. So I don't want to overwhelm you with this information. I want to actually calm you down. I want to take your fright and fear away from this variety of terminologies that exists. Okay, so subject, predicator, complement for Halliday's interpersonal analysis because the two objects are obligatory. And actor, material, process, beneficiary, goal. Beneficiary, you know, when you're given cookies, you benefit, and the cookies are, I made them, so I changed I influenced something and created something, and that is the goal. So here you see for certain types of objects, namely those that are changed as a consequence of action or are created as a consequence of the action of the verb, are called goals. An object that is not phased by the action of the verb is something else. That's sometimes called a scope by some people, and also sometimes called a range. But I don't want to get into this, and I'm not fit to talk about this. I just know that this particular sentence is correct because a very good friend of mine who is an absolute pro checked it. So just to show you, these are, you know, traditional grammar and modern grammars, the three Bibles. They agree that in this particular sentence, these are two objects. I put the cookies on the table. Now here we have some disagreement. Traditional grammar, and I go with traditional grammar on this one, as you can see from the fact that I color parsed that version, says that this final element here on the table actually predicates something about the object. And that is why it's called an objective predicate. So I did something to the cookies, and now the cookies are on the table. So on the table is the predicate that belongs to the object. In a way, Quirk and Quirk and Longman, on the other hand, say that on the table is an adverbial of place, and because it is demanded by the action of the verb, it's an obligatory adverbial. So Quirk will call this an object-related adverbial, and object-related adverbials are obligatory. And Longman will call this a circumstance adverbial, an obligatory circumstance adverbial. And because it is an obligatory element, which all grammars agree on, Huddleston and Halliday call it a complement. And now you see again how the experiential analysis is completely different, uses different nomenclature: actor, material, process, goal, attribute. Now, goal, the cookies are the goal because, as we point out, it's the object that was changed, that is created by the process of the verb, which is called the process. And now it has an attribute. It has the attribute that it is on the table, because cookies on the table are considered to have a different attribute than cookies somewhere else. Okay. Now, Tom considers this suggestion ridiculous. Traditional grammar doesn't see a difference between ridiculous and on the table, because ridiculous predicates something about suggestion, just like on the table predicates something about the cookies. So it's still an objective predicate in traditional terms, and I go along with that, as you can see from the fact that I color parsed this version. Now, Quirk says that it agrees with that view in this case, and says that this is a complement to the object. Just like when I say the suggestion is ridiculous, ridiculous says something about the subject. By the same token, ridiculous says something about the object in this sentence, and so it's considered a complement to the object by Quirk. Longman calls this an object predicative, and in a way agrees with the traditional view and with Quirk's view on this matter. And so does Huddleston and Pullum, and they call it an objective predicative complement. So people agree, 4 different grammar approaches agree in this particular case. It's only traditional grammar who doesn't see a difference between this and the previous sentence. Again, all grammars and Halliday also agree that suggestion and ridiculous are obligatory elements, so it's complement on the interpersonal analysis. But then it's more complicated for the existential analysis. Attributive process, carrier, and attribute is one version to look at it, and the other one is that the censor has a mental process, considering something is a mental process, and what he is considering is that the suggestion is ridiculous. So the sentence, the suggestion is ridiculous, we would have carrier and attributive process and attribute, and then now we still have the carrier and the attribute. We just don't, so it's the mental process, he considers something, so then it's sort of like, and the suggestion is sort of the complement or the object of what is being considered, and what is being considered is that the suggestion is ridiculous. So there are 2 ways of handling it on the experiential level in the Hallidayan model. My dog is cute. This is an example of the link verb pattern column. Traditional grammar says subject, verb, predicate, complement. Now, the view is link verbs are verbs of incomplete predication, and they need predicate complements to be completed in order to be a complete predicate. Now, yes, it is true that objects are required elements, but the Curme seems to make a distinction for this reason. The idea is that with link verbs, we usually do not see the direction that the thought is taking. And transitive verbs already predicate, but they then require an object on which they can predicate something. So that is why link verbs are called verbs of incomplete predication, and they require a predicate complement. So, Quirk, the second one. Oops, I should have changed A and B. It's because I actually started, but doesn't matter. Okay, subject, verb, complement to the subject, because he looks, Quirk et al., Quirk and his colleagues, look at this not from a structural point of view, as does Curme, but from a semantic point of view. The predicate complement, when it's an adjective or a noun phrase, expresses something about the subject, and so it's called a complement to the subject. Longman follows the same thinking, only that they choose a different term and say subject predicative. Complement to the subject and subject predicative are identical elements, you know. So look at these. The thinking between well, what I here called A and C is different from B, but A and C have the same kind of thinking and the different terms. So here's a little bit of a problem. You know, there are these class elements. You can see that so far in all the different versions, the elements have been seen as, you know, the elements were, I mean, the segmentation has been the same, but the terminology has been different. And sometimes it was just a matter of terminology, but sometimes there's also a different philosophy underlying it, as for instance, with the objective predicate and the predicate complement. Okay, so Huddleston Pullum also go with Quirk and Longman, but again have their own terminology, but they have the same kind of thinking. Predicator is the verb, we already got used to that, and subjective predicative complement. Okay, subject predicator complement for the interpersonal analysis in the Hallidayan system. Again, the predicate complement is an obligatory element. So you see, well, I'll get to that in a minute, carry attributive process and attribute, because we are saying something about the subject. And now in this case, while Quirk and Longman often mix semantic and formal considerations in their nomenclature, Halliday is very keen on separating that. So when you look at the interpersonal elements, then it's more of it goes more in the direction of syntactic functionality. And when you look at the experiential and the textual analyses, then it goes more in the direction of semantics. And so this is an attempt to take care of both semantics and formal considerations, and do it simultaneously and yet keep them apart, if you know what I mean. Okay, my dog is on my bed. Here we have a similar problem that we had with the objective predicate. Again, Quirk and Longman go with the semantic view and say, well, something, it's an adverbial of place and it's subject related. So here we're not talking about what kind of state the subject is in, but we're talking about the location of the subject. So that's a semantic consideration, and so they say subject-related adverbial in Quirk's case and obligatory circumstance adverbial in Longman's case. Huddleston Pullum again go with the functional view in case of obligatoriness or not. It's obligatory, so it's a complement. Subject predicator complement in the Hallidayan system on the interpersonal level. Yes, it's again a functional view, and carry a relational process and attribute. Now, That's an interesting thing. An attribute in traditional terms is often something that pertains to us, like, you know, silliness or beauty. And in the Hallidayan model, it can also be a location. It's almost psychological and philosophical, because, of course, we are slightly different in different locations. So in a way, the grammar captures that. Okay, so here is another warning: complement. When you encounter the word complement, it can mean so many things. So with some people, this term refers to all obligatory elements in a clause. So the subject, the subjective. Well, it's so difficult to settle on one. I had so many terms. Okay, I'll use the traditional terms now. It can be used for the predicate complement, for objects, for both objects, for obligatory adverbials, and for the objective predicate. And with some people, it's just one or two of those. And with some people, it's something else altogether. Some people, for instance, say that all prepositions need complementation. So certain kinds of because a preposition is followed by a noun phrase or a noun-like creature, and that is by some people called prepositional complementation, or just complements to the preposition, or just complements. So again, I don't want to confuse you. I want to just remind you to be careful and to not be overwhelmed. Just remember, everybody is just a human being with his or her own way of thinking and their idiosyncrasies and shortcomings, and we either knowingly or unknowingly choose to use certain kinds of thinking and certain kinds of terms and terminologies that go along with that thinking. And as I said, sometimes we're aware of it and sometimes we're not, and often it's a mixture. Adjunct. Adjunct is often an optional adverbial element, but it can also be other optional elements like predicate appositives. So again, just to be careful. And I mentioned before that goal with Huddleston and Pullum is an adverbial thing, creature, and in the Hallidayan model, it is a certain kind of object. Yeah, when we're looking at it from an existential point of view, existential analysis, metafunctional point of view. Okay, again, try not to be overwhelmed. This was not to show off my reading or knowledge. This is just meant to be helpful, because I found that my students were overwhelmed and confused by all of these terminologies. And actually, this is one of the reasons why I chose the color system. I chose the color system in order to avoid these confusions and to help people to get back to the essence. Excuse me. But I also did it because I think that it's great. You know, you can go to your local office supply store, pick up some highlighters, and then you can apply grammar, your understanding of grammar, to texts that you read and texts that you write. And that's so helpful. It's really helpful. Okay, finally, I want to point out what 4 different grammar approaches say about what I call a predicate appositive. So that's version 1. Remember, I talked about predicate appositives in my analysis of my favorite sentence of in The Great Gatsby, and when I introduced you to clause elements. So predicate appositives are, according to Curme and traditional grammar, basically non-finite and or verbless predicates that have been placed alongside of the finite predicate. And most of those, or many of those, are movable, and often they occur in initial position, but they can also occur in medial and final position. And again, I'm going to make videos about cases where they are movable and where they are non-movable. Quirk calls this particular predicate appositive a supplementive adjective clause. I put it in parentheses because, of course, there are other supplementive clauses, and I haven't really gone through the whole of Quirk in order to see his take on predicate appositives. Quirk and Longman tend to look at these as reduced clauses and put them into different types of categorization systems. And I'm doing it differently. I think that the Curme model is really helpful for people that want to learn to become good close readers and good writers. And again, great writers usually cannot deal with grammatical nomenclature. They're just great readers, and because they've read so much and written so much, they're just good at this. And the brain is so kind and helpful. If we read a lot and have a musical ear, and we write a lot and practice, we will become great writers. I guess there's also a gift, but all great writers are also very, very diligent and enthusiastically so. But when I say about writing is, of course, when we teach writing and when we think about expository prose and stuff, then it can be very helpful to have some kind of nomenclature in order to refer to elements. Okay, so Quirk says supplementive adjective clause to this particular predicate appositive. Longman sometimes calls them detached predicative, and sometimes supplement clause and sometimes supplementive clause. Now, I don't like the detached predicative because not all subject predicatives can be predicate appositives, and especially the other structures can be predicate appositives that cannot be subject predicatives. So there is common ground, but they're not identical. And so I think this is a very unhelpful terminology. And finally, Huddleston Pullum calls them predicative adjuncts, these predicate appositives. And here you see an adjunct is not only an adverbial. Well, and I don't know, I haven't read enough Huddleston and Pullum to see whether they think that all of these are adverbial or whether adjunct is just something that you attach. You know, etymologically speaking, an adjunct is something that you attach. And so it doesn't have to be just adverbial. So I haven't read enough Huddleston and Pullum. I only, I've looked at the Fat Grammar. You know, they have this big grammar Bible, but it's very expensive. It's around $250, and I haven't found a great deal on it. So I only bought the student version, and I haven't read that cover to cover because I've decided to go with Curme most of the time or with Quirk. I read the Longman student grammar cover to cover and many parts of their unabridged version, and I read a lot of Quirk and a lot of Curme. Okay, all of this is to say that I think you know, it's good to look at when you have a grammar book to see what is it. Is this a linguistic grammar, and is it trying to create a model and hypotheses, or is this a practical grammar? Is it a school grammar? Is it a traditional grammar? What is the purpose? You know, as with any text, we have to see who wrote it, what is he or she saying, and why did she or he wrote it, and why did she or he write it, and what is the purpose, and do I need it? Do I want it? Yeah. Okay, I hope this helped you. What I've just given you is not like this in my book. I only give you a little bit of an overview with regard to the predicate complement. So this is actually more than is in my book about this particular topic. But if you find this my kind of approach to grammar helpful, you might enjoy my book. And you can also book me for one-on-one sessions, and I also do group coaching. And anyway, I enjoyed making this presentation for you, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. So far, I don't have too many fans yet. I am a newbie to the YouTube world, so I have time to answer all the comments. So if you have grammar questions, pop them into the comment section below, and I will be delighted to answer them for you. Okay, this is it. Subscribe to my channel and pass on this or share this video with other people. And I would be happy to have you in my Sentence Watcher tribe and Joy of Syntax tribe. Have a lovely day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.